So in this analysis video, we are going to try to understand the problem and to devise a plan. And as you can see, I have copied the text, so we have it here. And let's take a look what it says. I have tried to read it and understand it, and what I have found that is the core of it is the following. I'll mark it with yellow here. What I understand is the core is that we shall create a function called fit that, given two integer values x and y as parameters, returns how many whole times x fits in y and what the remainder is. And then we are given a few examples here just to make sure that we understand what we are tasked to do. So if we take a look at one of them, we can take a look at the second one here, for example. What we are supposed to do is that we're going to create this function called fit that takes two parameters, x and y, and the arguments here is 3 and 10, and we're gonna use this function to check how many whole times can I fit 3 in 10. So we can fit it 3 times. 3 times 3 is 9. But if we try to fit it 4 times, 4 times 3 is 12. And 12 is bigger than 10, so it cannot fit 4 times. So, but 3 times is okay. 3 times 3 is 9. So 3, for how many times we can fit it in 10, is one of the values that we're going to return. That is the value that is going to be returned into the variable a. But what will be returned as the second value that will be stored in b in this case? Well, that is the remainder. So 3 times 3 is 9. And then we check how much is there left from 9 up to 10. So we take 10 minus 9 is 1. So the remainder is 1. 1 is going to be stored in b. So the fit function will return two values. And in this case, it will be 3 and 1. So now that we have talked a little bit about what is it that we're supposed to do, and we have for ourselves made sure that we understand what it is that we're tasked to do, it's time to devise a plan. And I will start by adding the method to the flowchart. And as normally, I will start by adding the start and the stop, or in this case, the function name and return. Okay, and as we talked about, there are two things we need to calculate in this function. How many whole times x fits in y, and the second thing is what the remainder is. So I will add that in here, that there are two steps. So here we can see that, okay, we are calling the function. What will happen in the function? In the function we will calculate how many whole times we can fit that number in the other, and then after that we calculate the remainder and we return both of them. We can see here, if we read the text, that we shall return both of them. So we don't write it here, we just have to remember it from the text. So now that we have the function, I'm going to add a little bit of instructions here for how we can check that our function is working. So how do we call it, and then how do we print or display the results so that we can verify that we get the same values as is described here. For example, the first one shall return 5 and 0, the second one 3 and 1, as we talked about before. Let's add a few more bits to this flowchart. Okay, so when we start the script, what shall we do? The first thing we shall do, I think, is to call this function so that we can get some values back. And we can see here we have 3 examples of how we can call it, but we need to call it somehow. And after that, we must display whatever we get back so that we can verify that it is the correct numbers. So when the script starts, we first call this function with the arguments 3 and 10, for example. Then it calculates how many whole times 3 fits in 10, and finally what the remainder is. Return those two values back to us. We store them in two variables. Here we can see on the left that they're called A and B. And then we display both of those numbers so that we can verify it. And after that, the script ends. A few times I have talked about that we can add comments, because it is important that when we devise our plan, that this makes sense to us, that we understand what we're supposed to do. It's no use if we can't understand it, even if someone else understands it, but we don't, then this devising a plan doesn't help us. And we do it so that it can help us when we are trying to implement it later on. And one way that we can help ourselves is by adding comments. And I will show 2 ways here that you can add comments to your flowchart. There we go, finally I got it right. So one way that you can add a comment so that you know what you should do in this step, for example, is that you can use this symbol. And that is probably the most common way of adding comments to a flowchart. So in this case, here we say a comment to ourselves, call with price and tip percent. Now we know what the argument shall be when we call this function. Another way is just to write your text, for example, return both whole times and remainder, and then just link it with a line to the step that you want to add a comment to. So you can see 2 different ways of doing it here,